Moving out of the dorms felt like true freedom. This second-floor unit was everything I'd dreamed of during 4 years of sharing cramped spaces with messy roommates. Hardwood floors that creaked just right, tall windows that let in the perfect amount of Pacific Northwest light, and rent I could actually afford on my entry-level marketing salary. The landlord, Robert, was this weathered guy in his 60s who'd owned the building for decades. As he handed me the keys, he mentioned casually that the attic had been used by previous tenants for holiday decorations and storage. "Just watch your step up there," he said with a knowing chuckle, his calloused hands adjusting his Carhartt jacket. "Those floorboards have been holding secrets since before you were born." For the first 3 months, I barely touched the attic space. Between 60-hour work weeks and learning to adult properly, I didn't have much stuff worth storing anyway. But when October hit, and Portland's notorious rain began its relentless assault, I finally decided to move my summer clothes upstairs. The access was through a pull-down ladder in my bedroom closet, standard Oregon house design from the 1920s. When I first climbed up there, the musty smell of old cedar and something faintly sweet hit my nostrils immediately. The space was surprisingly expansive, with exposed rafters casting long shadows under a single bare bulb. Scattered around were remnants from previous tenants, an antique dresser with brass handles that had turned green with age, cardboard boxes soft with moisture, and Christmas lights tangled like forgotten memories in the corner. The floorboards felt spongy under my feet, and I could hear the building settling around me with each step. I established my storage area near the front, making several trips up and down with boxes of summer dresses and flip-flops that suddenly seemed ridiculous in this damp, shadowy space. Everything felt normal until my final trip. As I was pulling the ladder back up, my fingers already cramped from gripping the cold metal rungs, I heard it. Footsteps. Not the random creaking of old wood or the scurrying of mice. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving slowly across the far end of the attic, accompanied by the rhythmic groan of floorboards under significant weight. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. The metallic taste of adrenaline flooded my mouth as I quietly climbed back up, each rung seeming to amplify under my trembling hands. I peeked my head through the opening, and the musty air felt suddenly colder against my face. The single bulb cast shifting shadows that seemed to move independently, and that's when I saw him. A figure emerged from behind the stack of boxes near the old dresser. A man, probably mid-40s, wearing clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. His hair was matted against his skull, and his skin had that grayish pallor of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in months. When our eyes met across that dusty expanse, time suspended itself. He tilted his head slightly, like a curious animal, and then did something that made my blood freeze in my veins. He smiled, a wide, friendly smile, and waved at me like we were neighbors greeting each other over a fence. I scrambled down that ladder with a speed that defied physics, my sneakers slipping on the rungs, splinters catching my palms. The attic door slammed shut with a bang that echoed through my apartment like a gunshot. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold my phone steady enough to dial 911. The operator's calm voice seemed to come from another dimension as I tried to explain that there was a stranger living in my attic who had just waved at me like we were old friends. Portland police arrived within 8 minutes, a response time that felt like 8 hours. When they went up to investigate, flashlights cutting through the darkness I'd just escaped, the man was gone. But what they found made the bile rise in my throat. He'd been living up there, a sleeping area constructed from old blankets and clothing, empty food containers stacked with military precision, plastic water jugs, and a 5-gallon bucket that had clearly been serving as his personal toilet. The ammonia smell that wafted down when they opened the space made me gag. But the discovery that haunts me most was inside that antique dresser. Every drawer was stuffed with photographs, hundreds of them. Pictures of me taken through my apartment windows with a telephoto lens. Shots of me coming and going from the building. Photos of me at Powell's Books, at my favorite coffee shop on Hawthorne. Even some that appeared to have been taken while I was sleeping. Detective Williams, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, explained that it looked like this individual had been documenting my routines for months, learning my schedule, my habits, mapping out my entire life like I was some kind of research subject. They searched the entire neighborhood, checking every abandoned building and homeless camp within a 5-mile radius. Robert installed new locks, a security system, and even had the attic access welded shut. But I was done. The thought of that man up there, night after night, listening to me watch Netflix, hearing my phone conversations, learning the sound of my alarm clock, it was too much. I broke my lease 2 weeks later and moved back to my parents' house in Eugene, until I could find somewhere else. To this day, I wonder how long he'd been up there before I discovered him. Had he been there when I signed the lease? Had Robert known? And most terrifying of all, what had he been planning to do when he finally decided to come down? Jessica and Uncle David had built their dream life in this gorgeous 1940s colonial about 30 minutes west of Chicago. White picket fence, professionally landscaped yard, the kind of neighborhood where people still wave from their front porches and know their mailman's name. Uncle David had converted part of the attic into this incredible home office where he pursued his passion for woodworking. Hand-carved oak desk, ergonomic chair, even a small flat screen for background noise. He told me I was welcome to use it for my summer psychology coursework, since it beat studying in any campus library. The setup was honestly perfect. No roommate drama, no RA doing wellness checks, just peaceful suburban quiet and central air conditioning, a luxury I'd never experienced during my years in dormitories. During my second week there, while working on a research paper about cognitive behavioral therapy, I started hearing scratching sounds from inside the walls. At first, I dismissed it as typical Midwest house problems, field mice, or maybe squirrels that had found their way into the insulation. But these sounds were different, too rhythmic, too purposeful. The scratching would start and stop in deliberate patterns, sometimes lasting for exactly 30 seconds, then silence for 2 minutes, then repeating. It reminded me of Morse code, or someone trying to communicate through the walls. The sound was becoming impossible to ignore, making it difficult to concentrate on my studies. I'd find myself counting the intervals instead of focusing on my textbook, waiting for the next sequence to begin. Then I noticed Uncle David's tools were being rearranged. I have an unusually good memory for spatial details, probably comes from my psychology training, and I was certain that Stanley Hammer had been positioned on the left side of his workbench. Now it sat on the right. His measuring tape had moved from the top drawer to the bottom. Small changes, but definitive ones. At first I wondered if I was experiencing some kind of stress-induced memory confusion. Moving to a new environment, studying intensive material, being alone for extended periods, all factors that could contribute to cognitive distortion. But the evidence kept accumulating. Thursday night, 11:17 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was checking my phone when it happened. The scratching started again, but this time it was directly overhead, so loud and insistent that dust particles began falling from the ceiling onto my psychology textbooks. I looked up and watched as tiny streams of debris rained down like snow, disturbed by something substantial moving around in the space above the attic. That's when I realized there had to be a crawl space up there that I didn't know about. I grabbed Uncle David's heavy-duty mag light, the kind contractors use, and began searching for an access point. Found a ceiling panel that wasn't flush with the others, like someone had recently disturbed it. I pushed the panel aside, and the smell hit me immediately. Unwashed human body mixed with stale food, and something else I couldn't identify. I directed the flashlight beam into the crawl space, and what I saw made my hands start trembling so badly I nearly dropped the light. Fresh scratch marks gouged into the wooden support beams, empty food containers, specifically, items I recognized from Jessica's pantry. Water bottles that looked like they'd come from Uncle David's garage refrigerator. Pieces of clothing that definitely didn't belong to my family. But the most disturbing discovery was a collection of photographs tacked to one of the support beams with pushpins. Pictures of Jessica and Uncle David working in their garden. Shots of me taken through the kitchen window while I was making breakfast. Images that appeared to have been captured from inside the house while we were going about our daily routines. I heard movement from deeper in the crawl space, a shuffling sound like someone trying to move quietly over insulation. I directed the flashlight toward the noise and saw them. 2 eyes reflecting back at me in the LED beam. Not the green shine of an animal's eyes, but the white reflection of human corneas. Someone was up there, maybe 15 feet away, crouched in that cramped space, staring directly at me. The flashlight slipped from my hands and clattered to the attic floor as I stumbled backward, my psychology training completely abandoning me in the face of primal terror. I ran downstairs faster than I'd ever moved, grabbing my iPhone with hands that felt disconnected from my body. My voice cracked as I tried to explain to the 911 dispatcher that someone was living in my family's crawl space. Naperville police responded with 2 units and a K-9 team. They discovered that someone had been accessing the crawl space through a loose soffit vent on the roof, an entry point invisible from ground level but easily reachable with a ladder. Inside, they found a complete living setup, sleeping bag, pillow, camp stove, and enough non-perishable food for weeks. Most disturbing was a composition notebook filled with detailed observations about our family's routines, written in cramped handwriting that covered every available inch of each page. Detective Thompson explained that based on the evidence, someone had been using that space as a hideout for potentially months, studying our patterns and preparing for something. The notes included details about when we woke up, what we ate for breakfast, which TV shows we watched, even which nights we seemed to stay up late. They never caught the individual. By the time they'd secured the scene and brought in additional units, whoever had been living up there had vanished completely. I couldn't remain in that house after the discovery. That same night, I called my parents in Springfield, and they drove up immediately to collect me. Jessica and Uncle David cut their European vacation short, flying back from Rome within 48 hours. They sold the house 6 months later and moved to a high-rise condo in downtown Chicago. None of us could shake the feeling that we'd been observed, studied, like specimens in some twisted behavioral experiment. The most chilling part? We'll never know what that person was planning to do with all the information they'd collected about our lives. This story takes me back to 1994, when I was 8 years old, growing up in a classic suburban split level in Dayton, Ohio. My parents, my 6-year-old sister Madison, and me, living the quintessential American middle-class dream in a house built during the Reagan administration, complete with a large, unfinished attic that Dad used for storing everything from Christmas decorations to tax documents. Madison and I were perpetually curious about that forbidden attic space, but our parents had established it as strictly off-limits without adult supervision. Mom was constantly paranoid about us falling through the floorboards or getting injured on the random junk stored up there. You know how parents in the 90s were, before helicopter parenting even had a name. Despite their warnings, Madison and I would lie in our beds at night listening to strange sounds coming from above our rooms. Usually it sounded like something rolling across the floor with deliberate purpose, followed by periods of complete, almost unnatural silence. When we'd mention these noises during Saturday morning cartoons, our parents would dismiss them with typical adult explanations. It's just the house settling, or probably field mice looking for a warm place to nest. Our first unauthorized attic expedition happened on a Saturday afternoon, when our parents had made their weekly pilgrimage to Home Depot, which in suburban Ohio during the 90s was basically a religious experience for middle-aged homeowners. Madison, who despite being younger, had always been the braver and more adventurous of us two, figured out that we could stack storage boxes from the hall closet to reach the attic access panel. We weren't planning anything elaborate, just a quick reconnaissance mission to satisfy our curiosity. But you know how childhood curiosity works. What starts as a peek becomes an expedition. The attic smelled like old cardboard and mothballs, with an underlying mustiness that seemed to cling to the back of your throat. Scattered throughout the space were the typical suburban attic contents: artificial Christmas trees in giant boxes, Halloween decorations in plastic storage bins, and Dad's collection of popular mechanics magazines dating back to the Carter administration. We used our plastic flashlight from the family emergency kit to explore, being extra careful to step only on the wooden support beams like Dad had always instructed during his rare guided tours up there. That's when we discovered something that made both of us freeze in place. Hidden behind a stack of boxes in the far corner was what appeared to be a child's play area, a small wooden table and matching chairs that we'd never seen before, toy cars arranged in precise formations, dolls positioned as if they'd been carefully placed mid-play, and coloring books with fresh crayon marks that still had that waxy smell of recent use. The coloring books contained pictures that made our stomachs clench with inexplicable dread. Stick figure families drawn in typical child fashion, 2 tall figures representing adults, 2 smaller figures that clearly represented children. But in every single drawing there was a 5th figure, always colored in solid black crayon, standing apart from the family group and appearing to watch them from a distance. Madison and I exchanged those meaningful looks that siblings share when they encounter something that doesn't make sense in their ordered world. We were about to investigate further when the familiar rolling sound started again, but this time we could see its source. A red rubber ball, the kind you'd find in any elementary school playground, rolled slowly from behind another stack of boxes. It moved in a perfectly straight line across the uneven attic floor, defying physics as it navigated around obstacles, until it came to rest exactly at our feet. Madison picked up the ball instinctively, then immediately dropped it with a sharp gasp. "It's freezing," she whispered, her breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. The ball felt like it had been stored in a deep freezer, so cold it almost burned her palms. The moment that ball hit the wooden floor, we heard it, a child's giggle, high-pitched and innocent, but somehow wrong. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the rafters in a way that made the hair on our arms stand up. We started running toward the access panel, our feet pounding on the wooden beams with panic-induced clumsiness. But just as I was about to follow Madison down the ladder, I heard my name whispered clearly in the dusty air behind me. I turned around and saw a pale figure standing where we had just been exploring. The figure was small, child-sized, but the details were obscured by shadows and distance. What I could see clearly were its eyes, dark and intense, watching me with an intelligence that seemed far too adult for its apparent age. Madison was already halfway down the ladder, her voice cracking as she called for me to hurry. I scrambled down after her, and we both ran to our respective bedrooms without discussing what we'd seen. We never told our parents about that day, but the strange incidents continued and escalated. Toys would appear in our rooms that neither of us remembered owning, always vintage items that looked like they belonged to a different decade. Madison would wake up claiming someone had been braiding her hair while she slept, and she'd show me these intricate patterns that neither of us knew how to create. Most unsettling were my homework assignments. I'd go to bed with incomplete math problems, only to wake up and find them finished in handwriting that definitely wasn't mine. The work was always correct, which somehow made it more disturbing than if it had been wrong. The incident that finally got our parents' attention occurred about 6 weeks after our attic discovery. I woke up one Tuesday morning to find a crayon drawing that had been slipped under my bedroom door during the night. The drawing showed our house in cross-section, like a dollhouse with the front wall removed. Each family member was depicted in their respective bedrooms, drawn with the careful attention to detail that only children possess. But in the attic window, clearly visible and waving down at the rest of us, was that same black figure from the coloring books. My parents finally took our stories seriously when they discovered muddy footprints leading from the attic access, down the hallway, and stopping abruptly at Madison's bedroom door. The prints were small, approximately the size a child's bare feet would make, but they appeared and disappeared without any logical explanation. Dad spent an entire weekend in that attic, moving boxes, checking for structural damage, looking for any evidence of how someone could be getting in and out. He found nothing conclusive, but his demeanor changed after that search. He became quieter, more protective, and started talking about job opportunities in other cities. We moved to Columbus when I turned 10. Our parents explained it as a job transfer for Dad, but there was an urgency to the relocation that didn't quite match their explanation. Years later, while home from college, I decided to research our old house. I discovered that the family who had lived there before us had experienced a tragedy. Their 7-year-old son had fallen through a weak section of the attic floor and died from his injuries. The family had moved out immediately after the accident, unable to bear living in the house where their child had died. Whether what Madison and I experienced was genuinely supernatural or simply the product of two impressionable children processing an environment touched by tragedy, I'll never know with certainty. But I still have that crayon drawing from all those years ago, and sometimes when I examine it closely, I notice details that I don't remember being there before. Maybe it's my adult mind filling in gaps that my childhood memory left incomplete, or maybe some connections transcend our understanding of life and death. Either way, I've never felt entirely comfortable in attics since then, and I always listen carefully to the stories children tell about the spaces adults consider empty, because sometimes the most important truths come from the smallest voices, and sometimes the things we can't explain are the ones that matter most.